Hi there, and welcome to the Main Idea Podcast. I am Jen David Lang, and my passion is helping school leaders learn. On this podcast, I speak with thought leaders in the field to highlight what's important to know and also practical ideas you can put in place. I am excited to speak with education thought leader Michelle Caracappa today. The last time I interacted with Michelle was when we were co-leading a session on what leaders can do during challenging times of social unrest. And we led this session in 2021, around the time of the verdict of the George Floyd case. And our focus was on what school leaders can do, particularly for an issue that seems so far out of our realm. And I hope that will be part of our focus today as well. Michelle Caracappa started in education as a founding teacher at a charter school and eventually became the chief academic officer at Success Academy. Michelle was instrumental in the deep gains that students made there. And when she became the chief program officer at New Leaders, Michelle kept her focus on student impact. Now Michelle leads and really consults with Lead Learning and has advised top leaders in New York City's Division of School Leadership, among others, to transform systems so all students can thrive. She also writes a Substack for educators called Reading to Lead. I'm very happy to have you here. Welcome to the show, Michelle.
Thank you so much for having me, Jen. It's really an honor.
Great to have you. Well, Michelle, of course, I appreciated the name of your Substack when it came out, Reading to Lead. That captures the essence of what I'm trying to do with the main idea. That is support leaders with their professional reading and learning so they can lead better. Can you tell us a little bit about the origins of this Reading to Lead newsletter, including why the name?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think that, I've always considered sort of being a reader to be part of my kind of like core identity, both personally and professionally. I started as a teacher and, became a teacher of reading, among other things, and then sort of had worked at the system level as a director of literacy and then chief academic officer. And I felt like as I kind of moved through all of those roles, something that continued to be really important to me was just sort of being literate myself and having a love of books and kind of being the kind of person who like never leave home without a book, like always reading, always like, and
On
reading
the subway.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like I need like 2 or 3 at least, just in case. You never know.
I get that for sure. Yeah.
But reading very widely, both to support sort of my professional learning interests, how can I kind of gain skill as a literacy leader and as a manager, but also just to kind of feed my soul as an individual. And so, one of the things that was important to me, and actually I started the newsletter, I guess, when I went back to school and just finished my Doctor of Education Leadership.
Congratulations, doctor.
Yeah, thank you. Was, again, doing all of this reading for my coursework.
Yes.
And a lot of writing for my coursework, and kind of wanted a personal outlet where I could kind of just make sense of all the stuff I was reading and thinking about and, working on professionally. And yeah, I kind of felt like a lot of my work is at the intersection of literacy and leadership. And so how are we, thinking about those two things together? And I also just think, for people who are in leadership roles, how are we, how do we make sense of literacy ourselves? As we are also leading systems to try and promote, stronger student literacy learning outcomes.
It works on several levels, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't be a leader in a school without thinking about literacy when it comes to the students, but then obviously for yourself, right? I mean, we are the lead learners, and
yes.
How can we have students learning, teachers learning, and we are not continuing to learning?
Yes,
Just
exactly.
learning. Listen to me. How are we not continuing to learn? So no, it's great. It's a great podcast. You have so many podcasts, Substack, and I have had enough coffee today, so I can't blame that. It's iced coffee season here in New York. So you have so many thoughtful and useful posts in your Substack, and I encourage listeners to subscribe to your Substack. I honestly, I was just saying this to Michelle. I learned something from literally every one of your posts, but I wanted to focus our conversation on just one of them because that's the great Ted Sizer says, less is more. So I wanted to focus on the one titled Reading and Writing at a Time Like This, which you published in February of 2026. You wrote this post not too long after and partially in response to ICE agents killing Renee Nicole Good and Alex Preddy in Minneapolis. But the post is equally relevant with our current situation, which includes many troubling issues, not limited to the current war with Iran. I just want to give some context for listeners. But
Yeah,
before we
yeah.
get into the content, who should be listening to this podcast today? Who should be reading a Substack post titled Reading and Writing at a time like this? What type of school leader?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think my focus in education leadership at this moment is it tends to be sort of folks who are system leaders, school or system leaders of teaching and learning. Right. So I came from that background, being a school leader, but also a director of literacy, a chief academic officer. And, a lot of my writing actually, I think is like tries to be pretty practical about sort of helping folks, sort of think about help folks that are in those types of roles think about how are they leading change across their systems? How are they leading for instructional improvement? But I guess the thing that I always wind up coming back to is kind of this question of like, well, like what is the ultimate reason that we are in schools working so hard to produce literate citizens, to drive gains to sort of, reading achievement. And so I think, who is the audience for this post? And my work in general is, folks who are working in education, and really trying to make sense of, what is like the meaning of this work. And it can feel like we're living in such tumultuous and dangerous times, I don't think that's like too crazy to say. And just trying to figure out, how do we forge a path and care for the people that we work with, the students students and families and communities that we serve. How do we think about our role as leaders of literacy and leaders of humans in this moment? Like, how do we kind of make sense of it all? And so that's maybe a little bit more philosophical than practical, but I think these things kind of are intertwined.
No, I think you bridge both in your Substack really well, where you provide sort of larger ideas and end up with the practical. But I think it's a great reminder. I think sometimes in schools we do get very focused on, you know, what is the time this session needs to end, and where do we have to move students, or and even with literacy, right, which curriculum, how much training, right, but sort of you mentioned the deeper reason, like why do we care about literacy and why are we leading schools? So it is that type of deeper thinking that is helpful to get back to and does drive the practical work that I know you and I are both very fond of. So
Mhm.
when I first read your post, I was immediately grabbed by your retelling of the classic story of Rip Van Winkle, to make a point that actually Martin Luther King Jr. made in one of his speeches, remaining awake through a great revolution.
Right.
Since not everyone is a Washington Irving buff and knows his tale about Rip Van Winkle from the early 1800s, can you share that story and the lesson you feel we should take from it today?
Yeah. So the this King's retelling of the story of Rip Van Winkle, I learned he quoted in many different speeches. And the sort of kind of looking back through some of his writings, one of the speeches that he quotes is in was this sort of like commencement address that he was giving, I think back in like oh gosh, I don't have the actual year pulled up. But he was giving this commencement address at Oberlin, 1965, Oberlin Morehouse, I believe, a few different universities, called Remaining Awake Through a Great Revolution, and tells the story that he says, it's 1965. And he's like, oh yeah, 1917 Washington Irving story. I'm sure we all know it. Kind of fascinated by like whether that would be true if you said that at a commencement speech today. But he says, everyone remembers the story of Rip Van Winkle, right? He falls asleep for 20 years. He wakes up and everything is different. But the thing that perhaps is overlooked is essentially like, what is the time period through which he slept? It's not just that it's different. He literally slept through a revolution, right? And it's like King George is replaced by George Washington. Excuse me. And sort of like, what is the meaning of literally being unconscious while the world has undergone such an incredible change, which I think is just feels so relevant as well to our present moment. Certainly, I never made this connection actually before reading the speech, but like the sort of like woke and anti-woke, sort of ideology of where we are right now, and just kind of, I mean, there's been so much happening in our world. It is really hard to know how, for each of us as individuals, again, personally and professionally, how do we kind of navigate through this incredibly tumultuous time? Are we awake to the challenges of our time? So I felt like just very relevant to our moment, as well.
And particularly weighty for school leaders
Yeah,
because they are not just responsible for their own um, being awake during this time, but for many other people and
right,
how they are awake and how they, what they take in.
right,
So
right, right, right.
yeah, I think that was a particularly important connection, for our audience here.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
you write in the post, you go on to say, quote, to be someone who is awake to our current reality means we cannot ignore what is happening. I think it also means that the work of education that cultivates the knowledge, skills, and habits to both read the word and read the world is more important than ever. I'm going to say that again, right? To
Mhm.
read the word and read the world. So, Michelle, first of all, what does it mean to read the word and read the world? Can you say it 10 times fast? No.
Yeah.
And and why is that so important to read the word and read the world? What does that mean?
Yeah. So I think the idea here is that I think as educators, we have an opportunity to really embrace, sort of like the fullness and richness of the power of education and the power of literacy specifically. And it's funny that you kind of like zoom in on that quote, because I was thinking about sort of that quote, and I hadn't necessarily written this piece with like my dissertation research in mind. I, finished my dissertation last year. It was published in 2025. And this really is sort of a core theme of a lot of my writing and work. So, the connection here is I looked at sort of district leaders who are leading large scale, literacy change initiatives across their systems and trying to understand sort of, these are leaders who had their districts had an espoused sort of commitment to equity. And what did that mean? And obviously, everyone has a lot of different definitions of equity. The sort of definition that I used of equity, or sort of conception of equity, was from this researcher named Rochelle Gutierrez, who's a math researcher. And she talks about this sort of like multidimensional view of equity. So, what does it mean to view equity as a way to increase access and achievement for students, to sort of give students the tools that they need to play the game, right? And so that's the sort of like, I think, more traditional, like read the word. Like we have to, and I believe in this, right? We have to give students the skills to crack the code that allows them to sort of be fully proficient readers. And yet it's our work is not done there, right? So Gutierrez has sort of this critical axis of equity that talks about issues of identity and power as well, right? So that's where the sort of read the world comes in, right? How do we actually use, in her case, math education, in my case, literacy education, as sort of a tool for social transformation? How do we actually support students in making sense of themselves and the world, and actually see the sort of, so we taught you to crack the code of, phonics and decoding. We taught you to, play the game. How do you actually set students up to change the game?
Mm,
And something I really appreciate and love about her research is that she says that you actually have to do both.
mm,
I think so often these conversations become really siloed. You
mm,
have sort of, the camp that's like, we like proficiency levels are at an all-time, NAEP scores have been decreasing for, decades now. Like we've got to focus on proficiency. Don't talk to me about anything else besides proficiency. You tend to have folks that kind of view themselves more in the like social justice educators camp, like don't trust test scores. We can't be worried about that. Like there's way too much at stake. And again, like I would agree with both of these, but I think the thing that I loved about Gutierrez's framework, and the thing that I find to be true in my own work, is this idea that we have to embrace both.
mhm.
Um, our charge as school and system leaders, as educators, is to really make sure that students have the ability to navigate the world we are in while also building a more just world that they can imagine and envision and that we can support them to do.
Yeah. When I think of those two camps, I think about like being able to read the word is necessary to read the world, but it's not sufficient.
Yeah.
So if we see those as both of our tasks, we have to go further, but certainly we can't ignore the first. And
100%.
if I looked up the definition of literacy from the National Literacy Trust, and they defined it as the ability to read, write, speak, and listen in a way that lets us communicate effectively and make sense of the world.
Beautiful.
And as leaders, we use the word literacy all the time, every day, right? But to stop for a moment, right? Okay, we can all list, read, write, speak, listen. Yep, great, good skills, right? But why? Sort of getting back to what you're talking about before, let's go below. Communicate effectively, okay, but make sense of the world. So I'm wondering if you connect this definition to your idea of read the word and read the world.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that's actually a really beautiful, it's a beautiful starting point. And I think you could probably even go a little bit deeper. And this is very hard work, I think, for educators to fully figure out where it lives and how to enact it. But how do we not just make sense of the world, but actually use literacy as sort of a tool for social transformation to create that more just world? Yeah, I mean, the other thing, I think another thought that I kind of come back to a lot is, Gloria Ladson-Billings talks a lot about, I've written about this too, but how, the sort of core question of the reading wars tends to be, what are the methods we should use to teach literacy so that all students become literate? Great question. But she sort of says, so much energy goes into answering that question of like how, and methodology and warring camps and which side and what do you think, that we lose sight of this larger question, which is essentially why? Literacy for what? And so I'm constantly kind of in the back of my head asking that question, like to what end are we working to develop literate students?
That's a great
and
question.
Community members.
Literacy for what, right? Just those
Yeah.
three words, literacy for what? You bring up the idea of literacy as a tool for transformation. And I wanted to share something else that you mentioned in your piece. You write that reading and writing matter. It's probably strange to have someone quoting you stuff. But I want to make sure people can actually hear the language in
Yeah.
the So you write, quote, reading and writing matter, even and perhaps especially while we remain awake amidst these dangerous times. And you give the example of the 5-year-old boy who was taken by ICE agents outside of Minneapolis, Liam Conejo Ramos. Of course, his middle name Conejo means bunny, and he was wearing a bunny hat and a Spider-Man backpack. And you share how his school, the Valley View Elementary School, used literacy to respond to this throughout the school. The kids younger, older than he was. Can you describe what they did and how did they use literacy as a tool both for the students and for transformation?
Yeah, for sure. So I had, I've been kind of been just as everyone, I think, been kind of grappling with consuming all this information on the news, watching sort of in horror what was happening in Minneapolis, watching my, neighbors in New York City trying to kind of organize and say, well, what happens? How do we kind of prepare ourselves, for ICE here in our communities? And the New York Times had posted this video of Liam's classmates. Liam, we're never going to forget the image of Liam with his bunny hat and that Spider-Man backpack. And his classmates from pre-K, through, the early elementary grades had created these letters, talking about the fact that their classmate was gone and what the meaning of that was. And I was sort of watching this video. They were sharing letters, drawings, poetry. expressing their ideas. It felt kind of like I felt like vulnerable. I felt kind of like risky almost in this moment, right? We've got like masked agents on the streets, and we have these beautiful, elementary school faces reading these incredibly heartfelt letters. And it wasn't abstract, right? Like I sometimes think that there's like this sense that like like you can't talk about and there's like obviously like we're living in this moment where there is legislation that is preventing educators from sort of feeling like they can speak freely and engage their students in certain conversations. Like, but this was not some abstract idea for them. Literally, their classmate, Liam, who they would see in the cubby on the carpet square next to them in the lunchroom, had been taken. And I think to be given the opportunity by their teachers, by the educators in that school, to make sense of that and to be able to put their thoughts into a letter and send that letter, right? Like it's not, this is not practice. Like these students got to actually respond to something that was really, really important to them. And the way that they expressed what was so important to them was through writing. And I thought that was just a really powerful example of, again, like in the truly concrete sense, if these students had not been literate and able to express their ideas through writing, I don't know what the vehicle would have been for them to actually sort of communicate these ideas. And of course, they're on video as well, so you can communicate ideas in writing. You can go to a protest and you can speak say your piece. But I just thought it was a really powerful example of students being able to actually see that there is power in their words. And to be supported within their sort of learning community and have the space to do that and express those ideas.
I think you hit the nail on the head. It's not abstract, right? No one's asking the students to write a 5-paragraph essay on Hamlet or on the mouse and the cookie, whatever for this day. But I think the literacy assignment accomplished 3 things, right? One, as you said, it helped the students make sense of that. So process their feelings, understand it, for themselves, like literacy as a tool for yourself. What can you do during a challenging time to understand the world, to make sense of it, to make sense of your own reaction to it? And then 2, to respond. They sent actual letters, asking ICE agents to consider the other side. They're beautiful pieces. I'll put a link in the show notes if anyone wants to see this little video from the New York Times. So they're making sense of it for themselves personally and intellectually. They're responding, so they're using it as a tool to do something with. And they were probably improving their literacy because they were writing for a real audience and a real reason. So, no one's going on ChatGPT and getting a fake response to it, right? They're actually writing and probably making errors and learning and growing their literacy skills in a much more authentic way. So I thought that was very powerful. I'm glad you included that because obviously I saw Liam in the news, but I didn't think of it. I didn't see the video. I didn't think of it as an example of using literacy as a tool and using literacy as a skill builder for yourself personally and emotionally as well and intellectually. So I just want to hit one more point in what you wrote. So I'm sure some leaders listening are thinking they have enough on their plates to deal with all of this, and they're also quite beaten down by the continuous bad news in the world. Right. But you quote in this piece sociologist Tressie McMillan Cottom, who says, quote, "We are tired then, not from doing too much," which we know everyone listening is already doing too much, "but from doing too little." She says, "We're not tired from doing too much, but from doing too little. People who feel agentic aren't as tired." Agentic, I guess we would say in our world, not with a sense of efficacy, right? People who feel they have a sense of efficacy aren't as tired. They're not as easily overwhelmed. So if you are exhausted by the onslaught of bad news, go to a protest, she writes. If you're exhausted by social policy that is demonizing children, start teaching children how to read. That was not what I was expecting. After the line of the first, I was like, wait, if I'm tired from social policy, start teaching children how to read. So, and it's not an accident that she's including this reading, this literacy as an act of resistance, right?
Right.
Literacy breeds agency. So can you explain a little bit what exactly, and we talked a little bit about it, but more, what is the connection between literacy and agency, literacy and resistance in your view?
Yeah. It's funny when I heard the first part of her sort of talking points, and I also was sort of surprised and obviously kind of thrilled by the example of sort of like, well, what can you do? What can we do in this moment? It's 2026, and a lot of stuff feels like it's out of our control. And how do we actually move from that place of feeling like we are overwhelmed and consuming just so many inputs, so much information about all of the things that are happening around us? How do we move to a space where we are actually moving into action? And again, I think the direct connection between that quote and the video and these students' letters was, I just thought again, you have an example of, I think you have so many of us in adulthood have a level of cynicism that is, thank goodness we don't see in 6 and 7-year-olds who truly have still held on to that belief that like, no, I'm going to write this letter and my one individual letter doesn't change the world, but I'm going to write this letter. And this letter can be part of the change that I want to see, right? And I think that as adults, we sometimes think that there's like a naivete to that, that we kind of reject. And so I would just urge us all in this moment to reconsider, right? How do we, like the students from Valley View, Liam's classmates, move ourselves to action? And then I think to, kind of go back to your prompt, for those of us and for, school leaders, system leaders, folks who are working within schools and school communities every single day, the work is so hard. The work does not get easier. Like, it's like 6 years past the pandemic, and our talking point then was, it's not a new crisis. The pandemic just exacerbated the existing educational crisis and crisis of educational injustice that has now existed for, decades upon centuries. And so the work is really, really hard. If you're a school leader working and teaching and learning and leading in the year 2026, you are already ostensibly doing a ton. So I think my thought for you there is, how do you kind of refocus your efforts in a way that kind of takes back like the true power of literacy, right? I think to go back to what we were talking about earlier, the true power of literacy includes being able to be a proficient reader and writer and speaker, but does not end there. And so I think if we can find ways to kind of take back the fully transformative nature of literacy within our schools and how we think about our literacy curriculum and instruction and the ultimate goals of all of that, I actually think we have an opportunity to kind of like reground ourselves in what meant, why most of us got into education. It wasn't only to sort of, ensure that students could sort of, pass over the finish line of a state test. It's, again, not that that's not unimportant, but that there is deeper work here and deeper power in the work of reading and writing. And that power is it's so needed right now for all of us to really sort of be able to kind of reclaim the power that we do have.
Yeah. No, I mean, if you look at our history, right, teaching people to read has been an act of resistance, right? Phyllis Wheatley, the first African-American woman to publish her poetry, it was her enslavers who taught her how to read. And that was such a powerful act. Or Frederick Douglass, who taught himself how to read and write. And after escaping slavery, he used his voice and his words to tell others about the horrors of slavery.
Absolutely.
So like those examples are so obvious to us, but sometimes in 2026, we don't quite make the connection. But
absolutely.
It is, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're making me think too, like, I think that there's probably more awareness now of the reality of sort of the history of anti-literacy laws, anti-Black literacy laws in this country. But they weren't merely just, I think they often get framed in terms of the context of what is the broader context that has sort of created the sort of present day achievement gap, as opposed to sort of really recognizing that these laws were put in place essentially in an attempt to prevent insurrection, because the idea was if enslaved peoples really had access to literacy and to the ideas contained in books and pamphlets and literature, that there would be no way to sort of, further oppress them, right? And this was like, this is in the historical record that all of these many of these laws came about as a direct way to attempt to prevent people from gaining their freedom.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's powerful.
That's very powerful. Very powerful. And it's, it's just a reminder, right? I mean, I think sometimes when you take a moment and you listen to a podcast or read a Substack, the idea is to sort of pull you out of your day to day and have some reminders of what's important. So maybe that's what you're saying here is like, take a moment, right? And think about the power of what literacy could be and how we're teaching it. And when we go observe classes, are we just looking for fidelity to the curriculum, or are we looking for something deeper there? So yeah, so if there are any other actions you suggest leaders take to make sure we're not Rip Van Winkling through everything, is there anything else that you think leaders should be thinking about when it comes to their own literacy or the literacy of their students in schools for now?
Yeah, I think it comes back to that question of like the literacy for what. And when we think about sort of what moment we're in, it is the springtime. That means that in most of America, we're like, certainly in New York, this is like testing season. And here in New York, we go, in New York City Public Schools, we go to school until the last Friday in June this year. So I think school leaders have an opportunity to kind of like reclaim a little bit literacy for what? How are we going to spend these last few months of the school year? How can we, in many cases, since now that we've gotten over the massive amount of effort that it often takes to sort of, ensure students are fully prepared to demonstrate their proficiency on sort of external measures like state testing. Where do we go from here? How can we build upon that? How do we not look at the next 2 months as the wind down to the summer, but actually sort of, engage our school leadership teams, our faculty, our student body, our families in an opportunity to really reflect on the true power of literacy. And I would urge folks to kind of consider, because this is also prime time planning for the year ahead. How might school leaders kind of frame or start to think about how they're going to frame to their school communities in the summer and at the start of next year? What are our ultimate goals around literacy instruction and outcomes? And can we adopt maybe a more inclusive and expansive, right? Because no one's sort of saying, well, many people could say, we need different measures than we currently have. What I would urge folks to do is to truly embrace a both and. How do we get at that sort of both and that Gutierrez talks about of teaching kids to both play the game and change the game? How do we sort of fully embrace the power of literacy to ensure that our students are absolutely proficient and advanced readers, and that they recognize the power of literacy as you said, as a tool for sense making, and also as a tool to honestly help bring about the world that they want to live in and be a part of in the future.
And your own both and. You keep quoting all these other people, but how about your own both and, Michelle? The teaching kids to read the word and teaching kids to read the world.
Yeah.
And I think that's inspiring. It may seem like, oh, I have to do more, but I think that's inspiring that, like you say, during testing season, of course, we want our students to do well in terms of official student achievement, the reading the word, but won't we all be more inspired to do that if we're also teaching kids to read the world? So Thank you. I would love to just end because we talked about a lot. Is there a main idea of this particular post that you would like to share with us? Is there an initial action or step you would suggest for leaders? And is there any other resource that also addresses the type of topic you were talking about in reading and writing at a time like this?
Yeah. I think we kind of got to it. I think like if there's an action or sort of a main idea, it's around reflecting upon whether our current sort of program or scheme of thinking about literacy in our schools allows us to do both, the both and of reading the word and reading the world. I think if there's a call to action, it's to really think about, as we are setting goals and developing our literacy program in our schools, are we creating space for both of those things to coexist?
Yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of, I mean, I was thinking, because you say, I was like, is there a book? Is there a resource? I will say, I mean, a book that I come back to a lot, and I know that like Zoom is kind of weird. I don't know if you can see, but this is Ladson Billings, Culturally Relevant Pedagogy, I hate that, asking a different question.
I'm going to put it in the
Okay.
notes. Don't worry. And most people listen, they don't watch. So
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. Asking a different question. Right. And the literacy for what comes from her, thinking about how you can kind of engage students in, using literacy as a vehicle to, or using their academic instruction as a vehicle to address issues that matter to them personally is something she talks a lot about. This idea of an ethos of mutuality, I reference in the piece as well. And I'm also happy. I was like, no one is going to read my 200-page dissertation. I'm fully aware of that, but
I can turn it into a book.
no, but one of the things that came out of my dissertation, which I'm happy to, I don't know exactly how you share as a follow-up to the podcast, but basically what I did as a result of this research was I created something called like a framework for equity-focused literacy instruction. And the idea is, if you think about sort of like if you're a school or system leader and you think about sort of the pillars of, let's say, your literacy strategy or your literacy program to an extent, which I sort of characterize as sort of like your goals, your sort of curriculum and assessment scheme, your professional learning plans, your leadership for literacy. And then I have a fifth one, which is around sort of thinking about what is your role to kind of think not just about instructional change, but like institutional change. If that is sort of your framework, how do you approach each of those buckets in a way that lets you get at sort of the both and the read the word and read the world.
Is there a link to this framework?
I will share that. I will share a link.
Share that link.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And if people want to learn more about your work, is www.weleadlearning.org. Is that the best place, or what do you say?
Yeah. I mean, very, very simple website. I do a lot of work with school system leaders on issues of sort of thinking about system-wide instructional change, literacy change, and really, I think the website, the Substack, is the best place to get to know me and my writing. So I would definitely love if folks were check that out too.
I will put that in the notes. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today, Michelle. I learned something, as I always do. I really appreciate it. And for people who are listening, thanks for taking the time as well. I know how busy you are. We know how busy you are. If you got something for this conversation, please share it with others. And I'll be back in 2 weeks. Until then, learn more and lead better. Thanks, Michelle.